Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, writer and academic Effie Samara. Effie, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good, thank you, Kenny.
Excellent. And on the other side of me, we have campaigner Sam Payton. Sam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How are you?
I'm not bad. So we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 352,494 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 333,914 were confirmed negative, 18,580 were positive. Today there were 22 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, but there are 0 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. That's the 13th day in a row with no new deaths reported. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not everybody will necessarily get tested. Once again, we do remind you, if you are showing any symptoms, please do book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 260 people in hospital last night, 2 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection remains at 2,491. This number only includes those who died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 45,961 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 83. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we have our NRS report. So as at the 26th of July, 4,201 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by National Records of Scotland today. Between the 20th and the 26th of July, 8 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, representing an increase of 2 deaths from the previous week. This is the second lowest weekly total for deaths involving COVID-19 since the first death was recorded in early March. Deaths involving COVID-19 accounted for 1% of all deaths registered from the 20th to the 26th of July, a proportion which has fallen steadily from week 17 to this week, when COVID-19 deaths accounted for 36% of all deaths. And before we go any further, I'll just remind you, if you want to join the conversation here on Scotland at 7, you can do so by following us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. That's hashtag Scotland AT number 7. You'll see on the screen there, we will be flashing up some of your tweets throughout the show, so please do get involved. But our first story this evening comes from the World Health Organization. The COVID-19 pandemic is currently unfolding in one big wave, with no evidence that it follows seasonal variations common to influenza and other coronaviruses, such as the common cold, the World Health Organization has warned. Amid continued debates over what constitutes a second wave, a resurgence or seasonal return of the disease, Margaret Harris, a WHO spokesperson, insisted that these discussions are not a helpful way to understand the spread of the disease. People are still thinking about seasons. What we all need to get our heads around is this is a new virus and this one is behaving differently, Harris told a virtual briefing in Geneva, urging vigilance in applying measures to slow transmission that appears to be accelerated by mass gatherings. She also warned against thinking in terms of virus waves, saying, "It's going to be one big wave. It's going to go up and down a bit. The best thing is to flatten it and turn it into just something lapping at your feet." The reality is that the issue of second waves has been a contentious one, much talked about by politicians, including Boris Johnson, and the media, but often very ill-defined. With no agreed-upon scientific definition, the term second wave has been used to mean anything from localised spikes in infection to full-blown national crises, leading many experts to avoid it. Second wave isn't a term that we would use in epidemiology at the current time, as the virus hasn't gone away. It's in our population. It has spread to 188 countries so far, and what we're seeing now is essentially localised spikes or a localised return of a large number of cases, said Linda Bald, Professor of Public Health at the University of Edinburgh. So, Effie, coming to you first on this. this is really just talking about how we think about this virus. And I've seen similar discussions from Devi Sridhar, this idea that we shouldn't be talking about a second wave. We should be thinking about how we can eliminate the virus where and when we are now.
Well, precisely. And as you mentioned, the whole idea of first and second wave is influenced by our thinking of the Spanish flu. From what I understand, obviously I am not an epidemiologist, is that to qualify a second wave, you need to have a lack of viral appearance for a while, and then a resurgence of the virus and another clear spike, which is what happened historically with the Spanish flu. As you mentioned previously, the World Health Organization have said this has not happened. We are seeing a continual appearance of the virus in different manifestations across 188 countries. Now, as Professor Stridva has said continuously, and she has been a great source of knowledge and inspiration throughout this period, actually, is that we must direct our efforts towards elimination with the knowledge that we have at any given time. The problem, obviously, is that this virus we know little about it, so we are frightened of it, and we should be. It's a very dangerous virus. So it's thinking how we can bring it to the point where it is completely under control. You're talking about a viral infection. You can never be that. But at the level where community transmission is noted and contained at any given time. So comes into this in a very, very big way, and obviously a daily discipline of sanitation, hygiene, making sure that you do what you're told to do, and stay as far away from other people as possible at this time, if you can.
Yeah, and Sam, we've heard this idea of a second wave talked about almost as an inevitability by some people, and at the same time we've also seen the likes of Donald Trump and to a certain extent Boris Johnson as well, both talking about seasonality. Donald Trump rather, a couple of months ago was saying, "Don't worry, it's just going to disappear by the summer as soon as it starts to get warmer." We've clearly not seen that happen. Do you think some of this talk has kind of almost been a self-fulfilling prophecy where people have said, well, we have to watch out for a second wave, and therefore there hasn't been the drive that we've seen in New Zealand, Taiwan, the Faroes, and now in Scotland to really drive cases down to zero?
Yeah, it's been from Donald Trump and from the other person, Boris Johnson. There's been a lot of nonsense coming from that kind of neck of the woods, both of the neck of the woods, and that's kind of took away the seriousness of the virus. And Effie's right, it's a very, very new virus. We should be scared of because there's so much we don't know about the virus. And to be talking about the virus in seasonal terminology and second wave takes away the seriousness of it, and people have become complacent, especially because we're now in the height of summer, in lockdown season. You still see a vast amount of the population be really careful, but you're seeing like the other side of the coin where people are becoming complacent and they think, oh, it's blown over, it'll be fine. We'll have another wave, and so they're not taking it serious. And I think, the World Health Organization is right. We need to stop talking about it in terms of a second wave and seasonal viruses. We need to start kind of learning the fact that we're going to have to adjust how we live, our lifestyles for the near future, until there's a virus or we get to the bottom of the virus, and it could be that this might just be the new way of life.
Yeah. Effie, I wonder if you've had any thoughts about this. The idea that this has reached 188 countries. Now, we hear a lot, obviously, about the US. We hear a lot about Western Europe. But there's, the whole of Africa where we hear very, very little about what's going on. South America, we've heard about Brazil and, Bolsonaro's attitudes to the virus and indeed his contracting the virus. But we don't hear a lot about some of these other parts of the world. Do you think that's something that's missing from the way the media has been covering this virus?
Well, there are different ways to thinking about this, Kenny. It's interesting because a close relative of mine found themselves in right at the beginning of this. So that was I'm talking late March. So he lives in Dubai, and he's a contractor out there, and he found himself in Egypt on a contract. So he was intercepted at the airport and asked to quarantine. Asked to quarantine for 2 weeks, and he then, curiously enough, remained in Egypt until last week when he got back to Paris. So I've been able to talk to him pretty much twice a week, and what's interesting is that because one of the reasons why he intentionally tried to stay in Africa was that it was actually not reaching Egypt and Africa at the level where the news was coming out of of Western Europe and America. So he thought, well, I'd better stay here, and things were going well for him with his contracts and stuff like that. So he was actually able to spend all this time in Egypt, and I think. I mean, they're completely anecdotal, but I think it doesn't seem to have hit Africa in the vicious way it hit Europe and America. Now, I could not tell you why that is. People have come out with all sorts of theories. Could it be something to do with the weather? Could it be something with the climate? There is absolutely no way I could imagine why that is. But I think it has not hit Africa in the same way. But also, it's our approach. When something small happens to us, it's a very, very big deal. When something small happens to others, it's not a big deal. So yeah, it's to do with a cultural approach. But I think so far so good. It doesn't seem to have been as bad in the African continent. In Latin America, you've just quoted Bolsonaro. Other than Brazil, I'm not quite sure that again Argentina or hit in the same way. So there has been variation in the behavior of the virus, but I imagine that we're still learning.
Yeah. Before we do go on to the next story, I'm not an expert on Africa at all, but I have been told that the public health infrastructure in a lot of African countries is excellent. Firstly, from contact tracing for AIDS. And then also for several of the serious kind of tropical diseases that face parts of Africa. They do have, in a lot of African countries, a really excellent public health contact tracing infrastructure. And that is one reason why Africa actually has coped better in many ways than Europe has. But we move on now, and England may be about to add Luxembourg, Belgium and Croatia to the list of countries from which new arrivals would need to enter quarantine for 14 days, according to reports in today's Times. The changes could take effect as soon as tomorrow. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said at her briefing today that she would be part of a Four Nations discussion today and would announce Scotland's position on these countries once the relevant information had been reviewed. The plans come as Keir Starmer joined Heathrow Airport in calling for testing on arrival for everyone flying into the UK to enable the 14-day quarantine period to potentially be reduced to as little as 8 or 9 days. Germany announced today that it would be instituting testing on arrival from countries classed as high risk, starting from next week. So, Sam, coming to you first on this one. First of all, let's look at the politics of this. Once again, this is England, or rather the UK government announcing something for England without having done any consultation with the devolved nations first. Is this just something we're going to have to get used to?
It's just despicable, isn't it? It just seems to be becoming very more and more common, where the UK government just seems to think they'll announce something without speaking to the devolved parliaments, and it just shows complete and utter contempt. So that's the political side of it. But the other side of it, really since the beginning, I'm going to go back. I'm going to kind of go back to hindsight again. They really should have been doing tracing and all these things right from the beginning with people coming into the country. To be waiting to do these things. I know way back at the beginning we were in lockdown, and everything else, but there was people coming into the country quite freely, and there was no restrictions at all. So I think that they need to be doing something. And Keir Starmer's right. To be giving people tests when they come in to the airports and ports is a lot better than people having to quarantine for 14 days. It's a bit of common sense, really.
Yeah, and Effie, on a kind of another point related to this, this question of testing at the airports, is Heathrow calling for this, but we've seen from numerous reports of people flying into Heathrow that at the airport people are not being required to fill in their contact details, to reporting where they're going, where they're staying, who they're visiting, where they're, all the stuff that was supposed to, all the information that's supposed to be collected on everybody flying into the country to enable proper contact tracing. Do you think this call from Heathrow is maybe a wee bit premature when they can't get the first stage of this process in place properly? Or is that a responsibility for the Home Office and Border Control?
Well, I will agree with you. Since the beginning of the announcement that people were going to be required to fill out forms and give their details of where they were staying and things like that, we have seen endless, especially social media reports and things documented, people taking photos of the entry point where they've said, here's my form, it's ready, no one to hand it to, and all this stuff. And it has not been an exemption. It's been, it's been almost like a daily occurrence of myself. At least I've been seeing this on social media daily. I don't know where I'm supposed to hand this in. Where am I supposed to go? So it's obviously we quarantine. I think, to be honest, the testing should have happened. The taking of temperature should have happened months and months ago. It's a tragedy that this was not in place. As I just mentioned previously, I know of this it's a close relative, who arrived in Cairo, and this was the 26th of March. His temperature was taken. So I do not understand why Heathrow, Gatwick, huge big, places where millions of people fly out of, they could not implement this measure to save thousands of lives.
Yeah, well,
this didn't happen.
Yeah, as we've mentioned on the show before, we spoke to Viktor Rudenka, and he's in Belarus. We spoke to him in the first week of February. He was already 7 days into quarantine at that point. It does seem like some countries, including our own, have been particularly lax on this. But we move on just now, though. Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak should extend the government's job retention scheme until the middle of next year to stop a surge in unemployment to levels not seen since the early 1990s, a think tank has said today. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research said the furlough scheme for workers employed in companies hit by the coronavirus outbreak should run until June 2021. It is due to wind down at the end of October, with the first reductions beginning at the start of August. The planned closure of the furlough scheme seems to be a mistake, motivated by an understandable desire to limit spending, NIESR Deputy Director Gary Young said. The scheme was intended by the Chancellor to be a bridge through the crisis, and there is a risk that it is coming to an end prematurely, and this increases the probability of economic scarring. Earlier this month, Sunak said calls for an endless extension to the furlough programme were irresponsible, and brought in a scheme to pay employers £1,000 for each worker they retain following the furlough. Sunak's deputy, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Steve Barclay, said yesterday that extra targeted measures to help workers in especially hard-hit sectors were possible, but a further whole-scale extension was not. And Effie, I'll come to you first on this. Rishi Sunak said that it was irresponsible to talk about an endless extension, but nobody's been talking about an endless extension. People have been talking about an extension for maybe 6 months, maybe all the way through to June of next year. Why do you think the government is so resistant to this idea?
Well, I've spoken before. My views are well known when it comes to conservative ideology. Conservative ideology is very puritanical, and it's always seeking to moralize about hard work and things like that. It's interesting, as most of these people inherited wealth, and none of them seem to have a job, and none of them seem to be laboring hard on a daily basis. So it's very strange from them but that is what they do. And the narrative that you've just described is very much in line with the whole idea of hard work. There was an interesting phrase used by Nick Ferrari, I believe, yesterday on the radio about, you can't be, this country if you're going to be doing just eating crisps in front of the television, in your gym jams. I mean, it's interesting coming from a man of his physique to be adding hard work, but there you have it. So Rishi knows very, very well that as you said, no one is advocating an endless continuation of the scheme. It would be lunacy to do this, but there are companies. We are looking at a possible situation, I believe, according to the latest reports, where we could be facing a 10% unemployment rate if companies and employers are not supported through this. Now, he knows this full well, but the rhetoric is very much to undergird and support an ideological position. Get back to work, regardless. So putting financial concerns before welfare and health.
Yeah. And Sam, I know in your own business, and you've also taken a real interest in the hospitality sector during this crisis. There are businesses that are still not allowed to open, and yet as of next month, the staff are going to see that furlough cash cut. It really just doesn't seem fair, does it, to say to people, you can't go to work, but we're not going to give you money to make up for it.
Yeah, but that's the Tory government for you, isn't it? They don't do fair. And at the end of the day, they're not interested in how it affects us. All they're interested in is how it affects them. And as Evie says, half of them have never done a day's work in their life, or what we would classify as a day's work. This is what happens when you have people running the country from let's say, a position of privilege and being born into a position of privilege. The problem that's now facing workers is, one, is the furlough scheme is about to be scaled down. Secondly, if we're looking at regional lockdowns, people are going to have no money. And what happens is when people start having no money, you start getting people who are frustrated and angry because they're unable to feed their families and provide for their families, even for the basic necessities. And to basically not even extend the furlough scheme, but even introduce universal basic income would allow families to be able to basically feed themselves, buy the basic essentials that they need to survive. Because surely at the end of the day, that's a lot more beneficial to the economy than all these people being unemployed and then having to rely on welfare benefits, as the UK government don't seem to like. So surely a universal basic income would be better and make people empower people to be able to look after themselves and their families. And the thing is, with universal basic income, it gives people money that they can they've got the means to go to interviews and apply for other jobs. Whereas if they're going to end up on welfare benefits like universal credit and they've got sanctions and things, then how are people meant to go for interviews and and apply for jobs? And the way the infrastructure's going at the moment for the public transport as well, it's getting more difficult for people to travel. So to me, they've been very short-sighted. But then again, that's the Tories for you. Unless they see it from their point of view, they see everything in this microscopic point of view rather than the big picture. In terms of, viewing the world from a position of privilege comes to mind.
Yeah, that whole universal basic income debate is maybe one we would love to go into, but we don't have a lot of time for it just now, so we do move on. And Scotland's GDP is confirmed to have fallen by 2.5% during the first quarter of 2020, according to statistics announced today by the chief statistician. The change in the latest quarter has not been revised from the first estimate published on the 17th of June. During the first quarter, the updated figures show that output in the services sector fell by 2.4%, in the production sector fell by 2.9%, and in the construction sector by 3.6% compared to quarter 4 of 2019. These results include the initial direct impacts of the coronavirus pandemic, including the start of the lockdown period in March, but do not include the large fall which has been reported in monthly statistics for April. The GDP quarterly national accounts publication includes the second estimate of growth for the October to December period. This uses data which has been released since the first estimate was published. The quarterly national accounts also include a range of other statistics which are used for economic analysis, forecasting and modelling. Now, Effie, we know that obviously the economy has taken a hit here, but is now perhaps the time when we should be looking at measures other than GDP, given that at this point, the size of the overall size of the economy is not what matters. What matters is how many people are living and dying.
We have, obviously, as you know, I'm in social science research, and part of my remit is to look into well-being and one picture of what it means to be alive, and for the idea of what is what of everyone's life. Now, it's a very big question. We won't be able to cover it in the next 5 minutes, but let's mention first of all that one is here is New Zealand. They, Jacinda Ardern's government, I believe it was about a year ago, they began to consider moving away from assessing growth in simply GDP in terms of growth. So simply using the growth figures to assess where a nation is, where a nation's economy is, but also use the idea of well-being. It's a very broad subject. It includes things like health. It includes things like integration. It includes things like access to public services and all this stuff. But COVID may have been for us, in all the tragedy that it's brought, the perfect incentive to guide us in a different direction. Us to where it's got us, and growth cannot be indefinite. Something cannot grow forever. Now, this seems again to be the position, the ultra-capitalist position, where you simply have to sell more. Now, that will inevitably reach a point where it will no longer be sustainable, either economically or socially. You cannot sell any more than X. And where do you go? And the problem is trying to sell exponentially and uncontrollably has got us again to a place where human life is worth very, very little. Human life is measured in terms of rhetoric of the Brexit, of the ultra Brexiteers like Ian Duncan Smith and people like that, saying this individual is low value. So attaching value to one's if in accordance to the money that they are able to generate, regardless of the manner in which this money is generated. I will echo what you said. This is a good time to consider well-being, to consider inclusivity, to consider the idea of possibly beginning to maybe even eliminate poverty. Because in a nation such as ours, be it the United Kingdom umbrella under which we find ourselves at the moment, or even an independent Scotland, this is very, very possible. And looking in that direction, GDP in itself is not indicative. Is actually, in fact, it's only probably indicative about 30% of the full picture of where a society finds itself at any given moment.
Yeah. We did do a deep dive on this issue with Dr. Catherine Trebek a few weeks ago. And if you watch out on Twitter after the show, we will tweet out a link to that, as well as to the one we did about the special show we did on UBI, since both those subjects have come up tonight. But we move on now, and France will continue to take a tough line on defending the rights of French fishermen in Brexit talks. But a deal with the UK is still possible. France's new European Affairs Minister Clément Beaune said today. We will not accept a deal at any price, he told France Inter Radio in his first public comments on Brexit since his appointment on Sunday. Better no deal at all than a bad deal, he said, while adding that a deal was nevertheless the best outcome for all concerned. Britain and the EU clashed last week over the chances of securing a free trade agreement, with Brussels deeming it unlikely, but London holding out hope one could be reached in September. France is one of the states that has pushed hardest for EU fishermen to keep the right to fish in British waters after a transition period ends at the end of this year. Before becoming Europe Minister, Beaune served as Emmanuel Macron's Europe advisor. A self-described Anglophile, he advised Macron on Brexit negotiations since the 2016 referendum. He said France would be intransigent on fishing and will not be intimidated by Britain in the negotiation game. Let's not kid ourselves. If there is no deal, it will be a difficult issue, he added. We'll have to organise a response for sectors like fisheries, support our fishermen financially. We're not there yet. Sam, is this newly appointed Europe Minister in France just trolling Britain with this idea that no deal is better than a bad deal for France?
Well, the thing is, he's going to have to see it from his point of view for France, isn't he, really? And, a no deal for France could probably, for Britain, I should say, could probably benefit France. Because I'm led to believe, I'd done a wee bit of research 5 minutes before I came on the show. I'm quite proud of myself. Anyway, basically, they're saying that if there was a no deal done, France, with their towns and their fisheries and things like that, would be okay. Whereas if there was a deal done based on what Britain's offering, France tend to lose £160 million worth of stock, fishing stock, because they would be restricted from coming into our waters. So obviously France are going to be turning around and saying, well, do you know something, a no deal is better for us. But we all know that no deal from Britain's side is going to be bad for us, but there is ones out there who are pushing no deal from the British side because it suits their narrative. But yeah, it's the end of the day, what can I say?
Well, I'll turn to Effie then. Effie, this is something that we've seen more and more from the EU in the last few weeks, maybe even the last couple of months. This language suggesting that actually the EU can survive with no deal. There isn't going to be a deal at any cost. Do you think this is bluffing, or do you think this is serious consideration by the EU powers that no deal, it might be something they have to consider?
It's absolutely serious consideration, and this has been one thing that you can say about the EU is that it has been consistent from day one, both Barnier as an individual, but also the Commission behind him and the position of the European Parliament as well. They have been consistent in their narrative. I think it goes with without saying that if you wish to leave, as Sam has said previously on this program quite gloriously, if you wish to leave, that's it. You're no longer paying membership fees, so you must be prepared for the consequences. What we've had here is we've had a deluge, literally an avalanche of lies prior to the Brexit vote. Then they won the vote, and then there's been an orchestration from 10 Downing Street, previously under Theresa May, a little bit more timid. But since Cummings took the reins of 10 Downing Street, we've seen this as part of an almost like an algorithmical strategy where you feed the public, your public, because let's not forget, people probably don't believe them, but you feed your public a narrative that you want to push, and then you just simply carry on drip feeding them. So this is very much, the idea of no deal is very much part of that. Britain, let's face it, this is 27 countries we're talking about, and some of them are the most important, powerful countries in the world. Of course, they will be able to shoulder no deal. In terms of what Great Britain and the United States are going to be able to do, I mean, look at what's happening in Kent at the moment. They're seeking to turn Kent into a giant, lorry park. Now that will be the situation, and it will be worse in terms of food shortages, in terms of pharmaceuticals, in terms of research, and it goes on and on and on. France has always been a country, one of the founding members of the EEC, and then obviously, the European Union. We could go on and on about the Maastricht Treaty, and there's been again a narrative from Downing Street about how awful the Maastricht Treaty was. Well, the Maastricht Treaty made the Scots into actual citizens. Previous to that, they were subject, but that's a different discussion. So all this long history, France has been at the forefront of making policy, of ensuring human rights, of ensuring pharmaceutical, of ensuring also protections from the United States. France has always been a critic, if you like, of certain aspects of United States policy, even under different presidents. I mean, forgetting the present TV personality in charge of the United States. So it's not, I'm not surprised that this is now coming from thing. In politics, you always get a degree of mediatized communication. They need this to be heard now, because there's been a lot of that belligerent talk coming out of Downing Street. Oh, we want no deal. No deal is not such a bad idea. So they have to retaliate, and they're doing so. Let's face it, France is not going to go down because there'll be a no deal, and they know that eventually, politically, the United Kingdom or England is going to have to again get closer to the EU. She simply won't be able in the way that they're portraying it, today in the Sun and the Daily Mail. It's not going to be possible.
Well, we move on again, and the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance could be expanded to include Japan and broadened into a strategic economic relationship that pools key strategic reserves such as critical minerals and medical supplies, according to centre-right politicians working internationally to decouple the West from China. Plans are said to be underway under Five Eyes auspices for a major increase in production of rare earth metals from Australia, Canada and the US, in order to reduce dependency on Chinese stocks. Rare earth elements such as cerium and lanthanum are key components in a range of consumer products, including mobile phones, laptops and TVs, and have widespread defence applications in jet engines, satellites, lasers and missiles. On average, China has accounted for more than 90% of global production and supply of rare earth during the past decade, according to the US Geological Survey. Five Eyes is the name given to the intelligence partnership between the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK. The potential for expanding the role of the group is part of a growing interest among right-wing politicians to form a cohesive political and economic alliance to compete with China. The proposals have an added allure for British Conservative MPs looking for new trading partnerships outside the EU and China. The parallel proposal for Japan to become the sixth partner in the intelligence sharing relationship was made by the Japanese Defense Minister Taro Kono at a China Research Group seminar last week, and has been welcomed by the Conservative chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat. Sam, coming to you first. This Five Eyes thing, it's very much the Anglosphere that was talked about a bit during the Brexit campaign and beyond. Do you think there is much likelihood of those countries coming together as an economic bloc as well as an intelligence sharing group?
Right, I'm going to do my best here, Kenny, to try and be serious, but Five Eyes sounds like a criminal mastermind on a James Bond movie. Seriously, who came up with the name? It's just absolutely, it's just, yeah. Right, back to the serious stuff. I just had to say that because I was thinking, James Bond, that's a James Bond thing. The thing is, with these rare earth metals, a lot of the times there's such harsh strategies that are used to extract these elements and metals from the Earth's core, and they're so damaging to the planet, and it's so damaging to the surrounding environment as well. Yes, we do know in terms of our mobile phone usage, our technology and things. We've kind of came into this society of throwaway, especially when it comes to our technology, and we need to re-educate ourselves and get into, when you've got a mobile phone, you keep it as long as possible, not go for the latest upgrade and things, because this is what, creates the need and the want for these rare metals and elements, and then this creates destruction. In terms of that and how they're going to come around and things, the right wing, it's right wing. That says it all to me. They're absolute loonies. And basically, again, I go back to James Bond, where, the big baddies and things like that, that's what it's like, the big baddies of the world, the kind of world, it's a bit like Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. Right, that's just me. You better go, Effie. I'm going off on a geek fest here now.
No, you do make a very important point about the production of these. If you've got a phone or whatever, then send it to get reconditioned and recycled if you're done with it, because these elements, they are often difficult to mine. It does affect a lot of people, particularly Africa and parts of Australia, even indigenous people being moved off their land in order to mine these minerals is something we need to be aware of. But we do move on. We don't have a lot of time left today. And we go to Malta, where Keith Schembri led a shadow cabinet during his tenure as Prime Minister Joseph Muscat's Chief of Staff, Malta's Foreign Minister has said. The Foreign Minister, who was Minister for Education under Muscat's government, said that Keith Schembri had too much influence and that there were two levels of government. He was giving testimony today during a sitting of the public inquiry into Daphne Caruana Galizia's murder. Jorgen Fennick, the businessman on trial for planning the murder, has said that Schembri was the real mastermind behind the plot. I had said that the influence of Keith Schembri was too much, the concentration of power was too great and not good for the country, Bartolo told the inquiry board during his testimony. Bartolo said that despite having spoken to Muscat, Schembri and another minister, Conrad Mitzi, after revelations about their business dealings came to light in the Panama Papers, none of them had reacted. He said that networks of hidden power could bypass what is discussed in Parliament and noted that corruption only bothered those who did not profit from it. In Malta, we have wealthy people who influence power, the minister said. We need to examine our conscience as a nation. He underscored that Malta's small size was a limitation in terms of investigating alleged corruption and said external oversight was needed. Effie, the corruption in Malta that's been exposed partly by Daphne Caruana Galizia's own investigations and partly as a result of the investigations into her murder have been really shocking. What role do you think outside parties like the EU have in helping member states to overcome corruption in their own governments?
Well, historically, Kenny, the EU have sought, if you like, to remain a little bit discreet when it comes to states' internal affairs. Let's not forget the EU is a fairly new exercise, and people will probably think, "Oh, what are you talking?" Around for the last 60 years. That's not new. It actually is in terms of its different capacities, and it's in terms of the different roles that it has sought to play over the decades. So it simply began as a cooperation, as a trade thing, and then over the last maybe 15 years, it has advanced its presence in areas such as human rights, in a major way, women's rights, and in the last couple of years, also we're talking possibly about defense strategies, also the environment as well. But this is relatively new in terms of institutional procedure. So the EU, when it comes to internal affairs, have traditionally sought to stay out of out of countries' different judicial structures, ability of different matters, and things like that. And we have seen corruption, and we have in different states. You see different ways of approaching things like human rights, women's rights, rights to abortion, freedom of the press, and everything else. Now you have for example, you have Hungary and Poland at the moment, where things are going a little bit. There isn't really enough time to go into that, but not at all the way that the EU would like to see them going. But again, they're trying to contain themselves and not expel, not impose themselves. My personal opinion is that politically, as the EU seeks firmer EU states are willing to commit to those, and it will have to. It will inevitably have to move into areas. Let's also not forget the level of corruption within the British state, and that was present well before the whole Brexit thing started. It didn't happen yesterday. It didn't happen in the last 4 years. That was never discussed because Britain is a very large state, big contributor. Also, most Germans are Anglophiles, so this is not something that they wanted to get into. But having seen the result of what this brought, and all tax evasion, again, the EU have been very, very active in the last 5 years in trying to bring this matter in as a priority. I think over the next decade, you're going to see a change in that policy. They're going to be more involved, and there will also be legal and institutional changes in regards to corruption, interference, and again, broader things like human rights.
Yeah. Well, we come back to the UK now, and Nest, Britain's largest pension scheme by number of members, said today it would toughen up its climate change investment policy and aim to fully decarbonise its portfolio by 2050. The move by the scheme, which invests the retirement savings of 9 million workers, is one of the most ambitious to date and comes as regulatory pressure builds for the industry to better manage climate-related risk. As well as the effects of climate change, such as rising sea levels and more extreme weather, companies are at risk of costs associated with regulatory change and litigation linked to the transition to a low-carbon economy. Just like coronavirus, climate change poses serious risks to both our savers and their investments. It has the potential to cause catastrophic damage and completely disrupt our way of life, said Mark Fawcett, Nest's Chief Investment Officer. No one wants to save throughout their life to retire into a world devastated by climate change, he added. Nest said it would immediately move £5.5 billion in shares, or around 45% of its portfolio, to so-called climate-aware strategies, containing companies likely to prove to be winners in the energy transition. The move would be the equivalent to taking 200,000 cars off the road or heating 50,000 households for a year through renewable energy, Nest said in a statement. So, Sam, I mean, I'm not convinced that we can necessarily categorize this as a direct carbon reduction equivalent to taking cars off the road or something, but it is good news, isn't it, that we're starting to see big financial institutions consider the financial consequences of allowing climate change to run out of control.
Yeah, I mean, at least they're taking some sort of responsibility for it, which is a good thing and never a bad thing. But my concern about Nest is they were set up by the UK government, and they're overseen by the UK government. And just with the story couple back with Five Eyes, were Hydra thing, who are going to see about extracting rare earth metals and minerals and things like that. And how can they completely and totally turn around and say that they are only going to invest in things that are going to be environmentally friendly and about climate change? Because at the end of the day, these people are part of the same kind of establishment. So, yeah, we'll need to wait and see. But yeah, any kind of investment in greener climate controls and things is a lot better than investing in fossil fuels. But I'm interested to see how the same establishment, and I don't mean Nest and Five Eyes are the same. I mean as in the umbrella of the establishment in terms of the UK government. On one hand, they're going to see about the rare earth minerals, and then the other hand, invest in greener climate investments. So I'm a bit
Yeah.
dubious about that one.
Yeah, there's always that risk, isn't there, when big money's involved that it's just greenwashing. We will obviously keep an eye on them, and hopefully we'll be able to report on positive developments as time goes on. But we come now to our last story of the evening. And two new funding packages worth £15 million will support the tourism sector in Scotland as it continues to feel the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. A £14 million hotel recovery programme will help to secure up to 3,000 jobs at Scotland's larger hotels until the start of summer 2021 tourist season. Eligible businesses can apply for individual grants of up to £250,000, in addition to a suite of wraparound business support and advice. The programme will be jointly administered by the Scottish Government's enterprise agencies and builds on the existing funding and support for tourism businesses through the Creative Tourism and Hospitality Hardship Fund and the Pivotal Enterprise Resilience Fund. Visit Scotland will also deliver £1 million in grants to self-catering businesses that have not received any other Scottish Government support. Businesses that apply and meet the criteria will be eligible for a one-off £10,000 grant to support them through the winter season. So Effie, do you think this is the right move by the Scottish Government to be supporting big hotels to get through the winter? When, I should probably have come to Sam on this actually, but the some of the concerns we've seen with the way hotels are treating some of their staff just now.
That was the point I was about to make, Kenny. I haven't actually read. I just brought this up on my phone actually. The government's press release, but is this purely to do with the larger businesses, or does it also provide for the small structures as well?
Yeah, it does appear to be for bigger hotels specifically.
Right. Well, I think there should have been a qualifier in there. Businesses who have retained staff and businesses who have. I understand. I'm not quite sure what it says.
Sorry,
So
I mean,
they also are-
Effie, there is other
Yeah.
support in place for
other
smaller
support.
businesses, but this is just
Right.
an extra plan
Yeah.
that's been announced today.
Large hotels, they already have an ability to borrow in place, and obviously employ a lot of people. So potentially you could be talking about safeguarding against larger losses there, which may be a valid point. But I think there should be a qualifier. They should really inquire into whether businesses have retained staff and also their behaviour through this crisis, and whether they have made people redundant, whether they have forced redundancies in people, and what was their overall strategy through the crisis. So going forward, so great news, but which pockets, is it going to end up in? That's what I wonder.
Yeah, it's something that we will obviously keep an eye on as we move on. Well, we are just about out of time this evening, so I'd like to thank Effie and Sam very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to speak to both of them, and we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well, especially those of you who joined us via Twitter all through the show. It's always good to hear from you. If you're able to support Broadcasting Scotland, then we would ask that you do so if you can afford it. Please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month helps us keep the lights on here at the studios, and then helps us to develop what we're able to do with the channel, whether that's creating new programs, getting out and doing more broadcasts from outside the studio as well. There's a lot we want to achieve with Broadcasting Scotland, but we can only do that with your help. If you're not able to support us financially, please don't feel bad about that. We do understand that times are tough, and we will always keep the shows free to view online. But you can still help us. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can find us on Facebook as well. And from there, you can share the shows around, let people know where we are and what we do. Some of you may have seen earlier today, we produced our first trailer for a show. So we're going to hopefully be producing those more regularly from now on. And you can always look out for those and share those around during the day so that we can get people knowing what we're up to a wee bit more. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, if there's anything you've ever dreamed of doing in television, whether it's appearing on screen like me, or working behind the camera, whether it's working as a journalist, an editor, a sound mixer, there's lots of opportunities here at Broadcasting Scotland. We can provide training. If you have skills already, then and you just want to keep them sharp, then again, we can make room for you here. There's lots of opportunities here. The more people who get involved here, the easier it becomes for us to develop Broadcasting Scotland into the channel that we believe Scotland deserves. So if you've got any interest there, then do please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. But that is absolutely all we have time for this evening. So Gordon will be back again tomorrow at 7. I will be back again on Friday with another special edition of Scotland at 7. And then, of course, I'll be back again on Sunday with the full Scottish. But until then, I just have to thank once again Sam Payton and Effie Samara. Thank you both, ladies. And to you at home, thank you again for joining us. And until next time we're back, have a great night. Good night.